Don't tell me you're letting him into your graduation ceremony. The whisper cut through the crowd like a blade as Rachel Martinez, radiant in her cap and gown, rushed past bewildered family members toward the back of the auditorium. There, standing awkwardly by the entrance in a wrinkled suit that had seen better days, was the old man from the hospital. Her classmates gasped. Her professors looked confused. Her mother grabbed her arm, trying to stop her, but Rachel didn't care about protocol. She didn't care about the cameras or the ceremony or what anyone thought, because in that moment, all she could think about was the past 3 years. 3 years of midnight conversations. 3 years of shared coffee and quiet companionship. 3 years of treating a crazy homeless man like he was family. What no one in that auditorium knew was that in exactly 4 minutes, 85 doctors would walk through those same doors. They would march in formation, wearing their white coats like uniforms, and they would salute the most brilliant surgeon any of them had ever known. The man everyone thought was homeless wasn't homeless at all. He was Dr. Jonathan Hayes, and 30 years ago, he had been Rachel's father's professor, mentor, and the surgeon who had tried to save his life. Welcome to True Story Zone, where the most powerful stories happen when nobody's watching. Before we begin this incredible tale of hidden sacrifice, invisible heroes, and unexpected honor, tell me in the comments, have you ever helped someone without knowing their true story? And if you believe kindness always finds its way back home, hit that subscribe button. This story will remind you why every act of compassion matters. But to understand how they met, we need to go back 3 years. Rachel Martinez was in her final year of nursing school at Chicago Memorial Hospital. At 28, she was older than most of her classmates, having worked her way through school as a single mother while raising her 8-year-old daughter Sophia. Her schedule was brutal. Classes during the day, clinical rotations in the evening, and 3 nights a week, she worked the graveyard shift in the emergency department to pay the bills. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., when the hospital was at its quietest, but also its most unpredictable. That's where she first saw him. It was a Tuesday night in October, around 2 a.m., when the homeless man wandered into the ED. He wasn't injured, wasn't sick, just ... lost. The security guard, Mike, was about to escort him out when Rachel intervened. "Wait," she said, approaching the elderly man with the gentle manner that made her patients trust her instantly. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?" The man looked up at her with the clearest blue eyes she'd ever seen. Despite his disheveled appearance, wrinkled clothes, unkempt gray hair, a beard that needed trimming, there was something in those eyes that didn't match his exterior. Intelligence, sadness, a depth that spoke of stories untold. "I'm fine," he said quietly, his voice cultured despite his appearance. "I was just looking for somewhere warm to sit." Mike rolled his eyes. "Ma'am, we can't have homeless people camping out in the ER hospital policy." But Rachel had already made up her mind. "The family waiting area is pretty empty tonight," she told the man. "There's coffee in the break room if you'd like some. Fresh pot?" The man's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected kindness. "That's very generous of you, Miss Rachel. Just Rachel." "Thank you, Rachel. I'm Jonathan." Mike shook his head as Rachel led Jonathan to the waiting area, but he didn't stop them. Rachel had a way of making exceptions seem reasonable. What started as a moment of compassion became a routine that would define the next 3 years of both their lives. But Jonathan wasn't just any homeless man seeking shelter. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, like clockwork, Jonathan would appear in the emergency department around 2 a.m. He never caused trouble, never asked for anything beyond a cup of coffee and a warm place to sit. And every night, during her break, Rachel would sit with him. At first, their conversations were simple. Small talk about the weather, the late-night news playing on the waiting room TV, Sophia's latest school project. But gradually, as weeks turned to months, their talks grew deeper. Jonathan knew things. Not street-smart things you'd expect from someone living rough, but academic things. Medical things. One night Rachel was studying for her pharmacology exam, frustrated with drug interactions she couldn't memorize. Jonathan glanced at her textbook and said, almost offhandedly, "Try thinking of it like a dance. Warfarin and aspirin both want to lead, but if they dance together, someone's going to get stepped on. Bleeding." Rachel looked up, surprised. "That's actually a really good way to remember it." Jonathan smiled, a sad kind of smile. "I used to teach. Long time ago." Another night, when Rachel was struggling with a difficult patient case study about cardiac surgery, Jonathan listened intently as she described the scenario. "Sounds like the surgeon should consider a Ross procedure," he said quietly. "Replace the aortic valve with the patient's own pulmonary valve, then use a donor valve for the pulmonary position. More complex, but better long-term outcomes for someone that young." Rachel stared at him. "How do you know about cardiac surgery?" Jonathan looked away. "I read a lot. Library's free." But Rachel had been around hospitals long enough to know the difference between book knowledge and experience. The way Jonathan spoke about surgical procedures wasn't theoretical, it was personal. Her colleagues started to notice their friendship, and not everyone approved. "Rachel, you can't keep enabling that guy," said Jennifer, one of the senior nurses. "He's clearly got mental health issues. This isn't healthy for either of you. He probably has dementia," added Dr. Patel, the resident who supervised Rachel's clinical rotations. "These homeless patients often have untreated psychiatric conditions. You're not helping him by feeding his delusions." But Rachel didn't see delusions. She saw loneliness. She saw intelligence being dismissed because of appearance. She saw a human being that everyone else had written off. "He's not hurting anyone," Rachel would say. "And honestly, he's teaching me more about medicine than half my textbooks." What Rachel didn't know was that her colleagues weren't entirely wrong about Jonathan's condition. But it wasn't what any of them thought. But Jonathan was fighting a battle nobody could see. 6 months into their friendship, Rachel began to notice inconsistencies. Some nights, Jonathan was sharp as ever, discussing complex medical cases with the precision of someone who'd clearly had formal training. Other nights, he seemed confused, asking her questions he'd asked the week before, not remembering conversations they'd had just days earlier. One particularly difficult night, Jonathan looked at her with genuine confusion and asked, "Excuse me, miss, do I know you?" Rachel's heart broke a little. "I'm Rachel. We talk every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Remember, you helped me study." Jonathan frowned, clearly trying to access memories that seemed just out of reach. Then, slowly, recognition dawned. "Rachel. Yes, the nursing student, Sophia's mother. That's right." Jonathan rubbed his temples. "I'm sorry. Sometimes the fog rolls in, and I can't remember where I am or why I'm here." That's when Rachel understood. Jonathan wasn't homeless by circumstance. He was homeless by choice, and the reason was becoming clearer with each episode. "Jonathan," she said gently, "have you seen a doctor about the memory issues?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I am a doctor, was a doctor, and I know exactly what's happening to me." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. "Early onset Alzheimer's," he continued, his voice steady but sad. "Diagnosed 3 years ago. I was 58. Had to retire from surgery, couldn't risk a patient's life when I might forget a procedure might operation." Rachel felt her world shift. "You're a surgeon." Was chief of cardiac surgery at Northwestern Memorial, 28 years. Performed over 3,000 operations. His voice grew quieter. "Now I can't remember where I put my keys." "Jonathan, why are you living on the streets? There are programs, support systems, family, no family. Never married, no children, and I couldn't bear to watch my colleagues." Pity as I deteriorated. So I disappeared. Easier to be forgotten as a homeless man than remembered as a brilliant surgeon who lost his mind. Rachel sat in stunned silence. For months, she'd been having late-night medical discussions with one of the most accomplished cardiac surgeons in Chicago, and she'd had no idea. The hospital staff, she finally said, they think you're crazy. Yes, I know. Jonathan smiled sadly. It's easier that way. When they see a homeless man with dementia, they don't ask questions. When they see a former surgeon with Alzheimer's, they want to help, and I can't. I can't bear their help. Rachel understood then why Jonathan came to the hospital 3 nights a week. It wasn't just for warmth or coffee. It was to feel useful again, to remember who he used to be, by helping her learn who she was becoming. Will you let me help you? She asked. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. You already have. More than you know. But their friendship was about to be tested in ways neither of them expected. As Rachel's graduation from nursing school approached, the hospital buzzed with excitement. She had finished at the top of her class and had been offered a position in the cardiac surgery unit, the most prestigious department in the hospital. Jonathan was genuinely proud when she told him the news during one of their midnight conversations. Cardiac surgery, he said, his eyes lighting up with a clarity that had become rarer in recent months. That's where the real medicine happens, where you save lives that everyone else has given up on. I learned from the best, Rachel said, squeezing his hand. Jonathan's expression grew serious. Rachel, I need to tell you something about your father. Rachel froze. She'd mentioned her father only once. Months ago, how he'd died in a car accident when she was 15, how his death had inspired her to go into medicine. What about my father, Martinez, Robert Martinez, Chicago Fire Department, Engine 47. Jonathan's voice was steady, precise. Brought to Northwestern Memorial on March 15, 2008. Multiple trauma from a building collapse during a warehouse fire. Rachel's blood ran cold. How do you know that? Because I was his surgeon. I operated on him for 7 hours, trying to repair the damage to his heart and lungs. I tried everything, every technique, every procedure I'd ever learned. Jonathan's voice broke slightly. It wasn't enough. I lost him on the table. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. For 3 years, she'd been confiding in, learning from, finding comfort with the surgeon who had tried to save her father's life. I've carried his death with me for 15 years, Jonathan continued. Every patient I saved after him, I wondered if I could have done more for Robert Martinez. If there was something I missed, some procedure I should have tried. Rachel was crying now, tears streaming down her face. You tried to save him. I tried everything. And when I failed, I made a promise to myself that I would never lose another father, another husband, another person that someone loved, without giving everything I had. Jonathan looked directly at her. Your father's death made me a better surgeon. He saved more lives than he'll ever know. Rachel couldn't speak. The man she'd been caring for, the person she'd thought she was helping, had been carrying the weight of her father's death for 15 years. And now, facing his own deteriorating mind, he was using their time together to teach her the skills that might save other fathers, other families. The graduation ceremony, Rachel finally managed. Will you come? Jonathan shook his head. I don't belong in your world anymore. You're wrong, Rachel said firmly. You belong in my world more than anyone. But convincing Jonathan to attend graduation was only the beginning. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. She did something she'd never done before. She researched Dr. Jonathan Hayes. What she found took her breath away. Dr. Jonathan Hayes wasn't just any cardiac surgeon. He was a legend. Articles in medical journals spanning 3 decades. Innovations in pediatric heart surgery that had saved thousands of children. Awards, recognitions, teaching positions at medical schools across the country. And then, abruptly, 3 years ago, everything stopped. No more publications, no more conferences, no more public appearances. Dr. Jonathan Hayes had simply vanished from the medical world. But Rachel found something else. Contact information for Dr. Sarah Chen, current chief of cardiac surgery at Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Hayes, former colleague, Rachel called her. Dr. Hayes? Dr. Chen's voice was filled with emotion. We've been looking for him for 3 years. He just, disappeared after his diagnosis. Is he okay? Rachel paused, thinking of the man she knew. He's surviving. But Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something. Would you consider coming to my nursing school graduation? He taught me so much, and I think he needs to remember who he was. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Send me the details. I'll see what I can do. 3 days later, Rachel received a call that would change everything. Miss Martinez, this is Dr. Chen. I've contacted some colleagues. Would it be all right if more than just myself attended your graduation? How many more? All of them. Every resident he trained, every surgeon he mentored, every nurse who worked with him. We've been waiting 3 years to tell him what he meant to us. Rachel's hands trembled as she held the phone. How many people are we talking about? 8 doctors and nurses who owe their careers to Jonathan Hayes. Will Saturday work for everyone? But on graduation day, nobody was prepared for what was about to happen. Rachel had managed to convince Jonathan to attend by telling him it would mean the world to Sophia, who had grown attached to the kind old man who sometimes helped her with her homework during late-night hospital visits. Jonathan arrived at the university auditorium in his cleanest clothes, still wrinkled, still clearly second-hand, but he'd made an effort. He looked nervous, out of place among the families in their graduation best. Rachel's mother, Maria, spotted him immediately. Mia, why did you invite that homeless man to your graduation? This is a special day, Mama. Please. He's important to me. But what will people think? Other families were already whispering, pointing, making Rachel's classmates uncomfortable. The man who had taught her so much, who had carried the weight of her father's death for 15 years, was being judged by his appearance, just like he'd been every night at the hospital. Rachel made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of taking her assigned seat with her graduating class, she walked to the back of the auditorium, linked her arm through Jonathan's, and began escorting him toward the front. Rachel, what are you doing? Her professor called out. The ceremony is about to begin. I'm bringing my teacher to his proper seat. Rachel replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. The auditorium buzzed with confused murmurs. Her classmates looked embarrassed. Some families shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That's when the doors at the back of the auditorium opened, and everything changed. Dr. Sarah Chen entered first, wearing her white coat over formal attire. Behind her, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, one of the top pediatric heart surgeons in the country. Then Dr. Amanda Foster, Dr. James Liu, Dr. Patricia Williams, a parade of medical professionals, all wearing their white coats like uniforms. 80 doctors and nurses filed into the auditorium in silence, their faces solemn with respect and purpose. The graduation audience fell completely silent. Dr. Chen stepped forward to the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for interrupting this ceremony, but we are here to honor someone who has been missing from our medical community for 3 years. She gestured toward Jonathan, who stood frozen in shock beside Rachel. Dr. Jonathan Hayes was the chief of cardiac surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital for 15 years. He trained more than half of the cardiac surgeons currently practicing in Chicago. He pioneered techniques that have saved thousands of lives. And 3 years ago, when he was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease, he disappeared from our world rather than burden us with his struggle. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears as recognition dawned. These weren't just random doctors. These were his residents, his students, his colleagues, people whose careers he had shaped, whose lives he had touched. Dr. Chen continued, "Today, we learned that Dr. Hayes has been spending his nights at Chicago Memorial Hospital, not seeking help, but giving it, mentoring a nursing student, sharing his knowledge one last time, and proving that even in the face of devastating illness, his commitment to healing others never wavered." But the real surprise was just beginning. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, producing a framed photograph from a briefcase. "Dr. Hayes, this is the cardiac unit at Children's Hospital of Chicago. 86 children who are alive today because of surgical techniques you developed." Another doctor approached with a medical journal. "Dr. Hayes, your research on minimally invasive valve replacement is still the gold standard. It's taught in medical schools worldwide." One by one, his former residents and colleagues shared how Jonathan's teaching, mentoring, and innovations had shaped their careers and saved countless lives. But then Dr. Chen said something that broke every heart in the room. "Dr. Hayes, we know about the Alzheimer's. We know you left because you thought you were becoming a burden. But you taught us that medicine isn't just about what we know, it's about how we care. And you've been caring for people, teaching people, saving people right up until this moment." Jonathan was openly crying now, overwhelmed by the recognition from colleagues he thought had forgotten him. Rachel stepped to the microphone, her voice shaking with emotion. "Dr. Hayes didn't just help me pass my exams. He taught me that being a good nurse means seeing the person behind the patient. He taught me that knowledge shared is never knowledge lost. And he taught me that sometimes the best teachers are the ones who don't even know they're teaching." She paused, looking out at the audience of her classmates, their families, and now 85 medical professionals who had come to honor a man they'd thought was lost. 3 years ago, Dr. Hayes tried to save my father's life in an operating room at Northwestern Memorial. He wasn't able to save him, but he never stopped carrying that responsibility. For 3 years, he's been honoring my father's memory by teaching me to save other people's fathers, other people's families. The auditorium erupted in applause, not the polite, ceremonial clapping typical of graduations, but a thunderous, emotional ovation that lasted several minutes. When it finally died down, Dr. Chen approached Jonathan one more time. "Dr. Hayes, we have a proposition. The medical community has established the Jonathan Hayes Teaching Fellowship for medical students and residents. We'd like you to consider returning to Northwestern not as a surgeon, but as a mentor. Share your knowledge while you still can. Let us help you fight this disease the way you taught us to fight for our patients." Jonathan looked around the auditorium at Rachel, whose face glowed with pride, at Sophia, who was clapping enthusiastically, even though she didn't fully understand what was happening, at 85 medical professionals who had taken time from their practices to honor him, at an audience that had gone from judgment to genuine respect in the span of 20 minutes. "I thought I had nothing left to give," he said, his voice barely audible through the microphone Dr. Chen held for him. "Dr. Hayes," Rachel said, taking his hand, "you gave me everything. Let us give something back." But the story doesn't end with graduation day. 6 months later, the Jonathan Hayes Teaching Fellows program had become one of the most sought-after mentorship opportunities in Chicago's medical community. Young doctors and nurses competed for the chance to spend their lunch breaks learning from the legendary surgeon. Even as his condition slowly progressed, Jonathan moved into a small apartment near Northwestern Memorial, his medical expenses covered by a fund established by his former colleagues. 3 times a week, he came to the hospital not as a patient, but as a teacher. Rachel, now working in the cardiac surgery unit at Chicago Memorial, would visit him on her days off. Sometimes they would review surgical cases, Jonathan's insights, still sharp, even as other memories faded. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence. 2 friends who had found each other in the middle of the night and discovered that healing comes in many forms. "Do you remember the first night we met?" Rachel asked him one afternoon as they sat in the hospital garden. Jonathan smiled, That same sad but warm smile she remembered from their midnight conversations. Some days I do, some days I don't. But I remember how you made me feel, like I still mattered. You did matter. You do matter. I know that now, thanks to you. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Rachel had thought she was helping a homeless man by offering him coffee and conversation. Instead, she had been mentored by one of the most accomplished surgeons of his generation, learning not just medical knowledge but the true meaning of compassion. Dr. Chen later told Rachel that Jonathan's condition was progressing, but more slowly than expected. We think having a purpose again, being able to teach, is giving him something to fight for. You didn't just save his dignity, Rachel. You may have extended his life. But Jonathan's impact reached far beyond the hospital walls. The story of the homeless man who turned out to be a legendary surgeon spread throughout Chicago's medical community. Then nationally, medical schools began incorporating programs that paired retiring physicians with students, recognizing that some of the most valuable teaching happens in informal settings. The Night Shift Angels program was established at hospitals across the country, initiatives to identify and support homeless individuals who might be struggling with medical conditions that had caused them to fall through society's cracks. Rachel became a spokesperson for treating every patient with dignity, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. You never know who you're talking to, she would tell new nursing students. The homeless man in your ER might be a former teacher, a veteran, a surgeon. Everyone has a story worth knowing. Jonathan's medical journal articles were republished in a special memorial issue, with proceeds going to Alzheimer's research. Medical students studied not just his surgical innovations, but his resilience in the face of devastating illness. Most importantly, the relationship between Jonathan and Rachel proved that healing is a two-way street. She had provided him with purpose and dignity in his darkest hours. He had given her knowledge and confidence that would help her save countless lives. Mentorship, Jonathan said, during one of his last teaching sessions before the disease progressed too far, isn't about the young learning from the old. It's about two people helping each other become who they're meant to be. 2 years later, Rachel received a call that brought everything full circle. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle, but urgent. Rachel, Jonathan's condition has worsened significantly. He's in hospice care now, but he's been asking for you. Rachel found Jonathan in a sunny room overlooking Lake Michigan, surrounded by flowers and cards from medical students around the world. He was thinner now, his eyes often distant, but when he saw her, they lit up with recognition. "My night shift angel," he said softly. Rachel took his hand, feeling how fragile he'd become. "I'm here. Did I ever tell you about your father?" "Yes, many times." "Good. That's important. He was a good man, a hero. So are you." Jonathan smiled. "We take care of each other, don't we? In this life, we take care of each other." "We do." The midnight conversations, ... Were they real? "They were real. You taught me everything." "No," Jonathan said, his voice growing weaker but his eyes still clear. "You taught me that being forgotten isn't about losing your memory. It's about losing your purpose. You gave me back my purpose." Dr. Jonathan Hayes passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by the medical professionals whose lives he had shaped, and the nursing student who had reminded him that his life still had meaning. At his memorial service, Rachel spoke about their midnight conversations, about how a homeless man had turned out to be her greatest teacher, about how kindness creates connections that transcend circumstances. "Dr. Hayes taught me that medicine isn't just about procedures and medications," she told the overflow crowd. "It's about seeing the humanity in every person who walks through your doors. It's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to offer, even when the world has written them off." Today, Rachel is the director of nursing for the cardiac surgery unit at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Above her desk hangs a framed photo of herself and Jonathan from her graduation day, surrounded by 85 doctors in white coats. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, she makes it a point to walk through the emergency department during the midnight shift, not because she has to, but because she remembers what those late-night conversations meant to a brilliant man who had lost everything except his desire to heal. Sometimes she finds patients who can't sleep, families keeping vigil, or healthcare workers taking a quiet moment during difficult shifts. She sits with them, offers coffee, listens to their stories, because she learned from the best that healing happens not just in operating rooms and treatment plans, but in moments of human connection, in seeing people for who they are, not what they appear to be, in understanding that everyone you meet has a story worth knowing, and everyone you help might just be the teacher you didn't know you needed. The next time you see someone the world has forgotten, someone sitting alone, someone others avoid or dismiss, remember Jonathan and Rachel. Remember that behind every worn face, every difficult circumstance, every person society has overlooked, there might be a brilliant mind, a generous heart, or a lifetime of knowledge waiting to be shared. Because sometimes the greatest teachers don't stand at the front of a classroom. Sometimes they sit quietly in hospital waiting rooms at 2 a.m., hoping someone will see them as human. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we're wise enough to offer them coffee and discover they have everything we need to learn. Have you ever discovered that someone you thought you were helping was actually the one helping you? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to True Stories Zone, where every story reminds us that heroes come in all forms, and the most powerful lessons often come from the most unexpected teachers. Thank you for watching. Take care of each other. You never know who might need it most.